Thank you for joining with me. We are reading Cameo 30 in the appendix. Did I say that right? Appendix, yes. 1, Cameo Essays. Cameo 30, as you see him, you will see yourself. Dear Father, please allow me to set aside everything I think I know for an open mind and a new experience. And so it is. Thank you, God. Amen. As you see him, you will see yourself. If I can just focus here, there we go. What do you do when your professional responsibilities seem to conflict with your spiritual path? This, broadly speaking, is the question answered by a short piece of guidance that Helen received from Jesus on June 19th, 1968, near the end of the process of her receiving the text. The professional responsibility in question was psychological testing, including the diagnosis of patients. Psychological tests were highly relevant for Helen and Bill. We see two of the tests familiar to them crop up in the dictation itself. In Chapter 1, Helen mentions the Rorschach test, a Rorschach response of footprints to the top red on 2. That's in parentheses. And the well-known test in which a subject's perception of 10 ink blots is analyzed in order to identify personality characteristics and even thought disorders. Also, Jesus several times mentions the sentence completion test, in which subjects are presented with the beginning of a sentence called a stem and asked to complete the sentence any way they like. Responses are believed to reveal the subject's attitudes, beliefs, fantasies, and emotional conflicts. In addition, Bill and Helen were deeply involved with the personality assessment system, a highly sophisticated tool for measuring a person's personality type along 3 different dimensions: intellectual, procedural, and social interpersonal. Bill and Helen worked for many years with its originator, John Gittinger, helping him to develop this test, performing research, writing academic papers, and in Bill's case, teaching. Indeed, according to Gittinger, Helen considered this test her primary professional work until 1975. And then that's a footnote 1. See William Whitson, Ph.D., The Professional World of Scribes of A Course in Miracles. Here is what Bill said about the PAS test. By using the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scales and sophisticated psychometry, an individual's personality can be defined and his behavior predicted with extraordinary accuracy. In fact, after working with the PAS, I thought John Gittinger had designed the most powerful descriptive and predictive system in the world for assessing personality. I also felt that as a personality assessment and predictive tool, the PAS ranked with the discoveries of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung in psychology. And then this is quoted by Neil Val, A Course in Miracles, The Lives of Helen Schuckman and William Thetford. And back to the text. Was there a conflict between this psychological testing and what Bill and Helen were being taught in A Course in Miracles? We can imagine 2 very different answers to that question. The first one, yes, such tests affirm that the personality, along with any mental illnesses identified, is the person. This runs directly counter to the Course's teaching that the person is in fact a spiritual being, a son of God, who merely believes he is a limited human with a flawed personality. The other answer is no. In administrating such tests, one is merely performing one's professional duty. This really has nothing to do with the Course. One can assess someone's personality and even diagnose mental illnesses without in any way affirming that the person is not a son of God. Jesus' answer, interestingly, is both of these answers at once. As you see him, you will see yourself, whether this be through the use of psychological tests or by making judgment in some other way. The effect is still the same. Whenever you have judged anyone, it is impossible for you not to make this judgment on yourself. If you see one of your brothers who happens to be a patient as exhibiting signs of thought disorder, then you will experience this same disorder in your own perception. For whatever your thought may be about anyone determines how you will respond and react to yourself and everyone about you. Take heed when you are called upon to fulfill your function as teachers that you teach the truth about God's Son. The only way you can experience any peace while this unfortunately... Oops, I think I skipped a page. Okay, let me repeat that. The only way that you can experience any peace while this unfortunate necessity for interpreting illusions remains is to recognize that you are discussing only illusions and that this has no real meaning at all. Try to say a prayer for your brother while doing this, and you will call forth and experience a miracle instead. And this guidance is in the special messages. This answer clearly comes down heaviest on the side of the first answer, that there is a conflict between psychological testing and the Course. This theme occupies fully 2/3 of the message. The first problem with this testing is that it essentially lays a judgment on the person being tested. It tells him that whatever thought disorder is uncovered by the test is a real part of his identity. On an even more basic level, the testing defines him as a patient, when more accurately he is one of your brothers who happens to be a patient, an emphasis added. In short, it teaches this person that he is not God's Son. However important the effects are on the patient, though, Jesus' message focuses mainly on the effects of the psychologist administering the test. Administering the test, in this case, Bill or Helen. These effects are based on the principle Jesus quotes here from the text. As you see him, you will see yourself. We can think of this as a kind of reverse projection. With projection, our self-perception shines out and determines our perception of another. But here, our perception of the other shines back on us and determines our self-perception. This principle becomes the basis of Lesson 134 in the workbook, in which any sin we condemn someone else for, we will then condemn ourselves for. For example, if we judge someone for being disorganized, we will then unconsciously search for our own areas of disorganization and judge ourselves just as mercilessly. Here the principle works with equal specificity. I can't say that word, but you get it. Jesus tells Helen and Bill that if they diagnose someone as having a thought disorder, you will experience this same disorder in your own perception. This may sound strange until one remembers that generations of psychology students have sat in abnormal psych classes feeling as if they themselves are suffering from each new disorder as it comes up in class. So, the way Helen and Bill see this patient will boomerang back and infect their self-perception, but it won't stop there. Jesus tells them it will also infect how you will respond and react to everyone about you. The ripples from this one judgment will simply keep going, coloring everyone and shattering peace. This certainly sounds as if Bill and Helen should become, in a sense, conscious objectors, who, because of their spiritual convictions, refuse to shoot their fellow man with psychological tests. That, however, is not the message. By labeling such testing as unfortunate necessity, Jesus is clearly acknowledging the need to do it. What he is asking is that as Helen and Bill continue to go through the motions of carrying out the tests, they do so with an overriding consciousness that they are discussing only illusions and that this has no reality at all. They need to remember that the tests measure only patterns in the midst. This is clearly not meant to be a half-hearted awareness in theory tucked somewhere in the back of their minds. Rather, it is meant to be a highly intentional thought held foremost in mind. A thought so powerful that it can actually determine the emotional effects of the testing. Ideally, they will even go one step further and say a silent prayer for this brother who is so at risk of being taught falsehoods about his identity. By doing so, they will call forth a miracle for him. Rather than feeling judged and labeled by shrinks in lab coats, he will feel blessed by angels. And the miracle will not stop there, for the principle that as you see him, you will see yourself does not just work negatively, it works positively as well. Notice how the last sentence says, call forth an experience. By calling forth a miracle for another, Helen and Bill will experience a miracle themselves. And now we will read Robert Perry's commentary on this section, Cameo 30, which I love, and I'm grateful that they address this. Because I think, I know I've been conflicted in my work too sometimes. Cameo 30, as you see him, you will see yourself. I find the guidance that this cameo centers on absolutely fascinating. When faced with a professional responsibility that seems to conflict with one's spiritual convictions, it is so easy to swing to one of two extremes. Either this is wrong, I really shouldn't do it, or this is just part of the job, it's not really related to my spiritual convictions. The fact that Jesus goes with neither and both is so telling. It says two things to me. First, it says that it is an insane world. There are many things we just need to go along with. Yes, there are times to take a stand and refuse to cooperate. There are times to overturn the tables of the money changers. Yet there are also times to go up and offer a sacrifice at the temple. If every time we stood before an activity that was laced with insanity we refused to take part, we would just basically take ourselves out of circulation. We would become a conscious objector to society itself. We would have to retreat into a cave, and that is just not Jesus' way. Much of life, then, is going through the motions of things that we realize don't ultimately make sense. And we can go through those motions with patience and serenity, for they are illusory anyway. However, when I hear the message to play along with some mad convention of society, I tend to hear that that activity is just fine, so partake in it without a second thought. Join in. Be like everything else, and I'll often do exactly that. However, many times I don't like this message, and so I'll play along, but in protest, brimming with judgment and complaining. I'll show up and act agreeable, but I'm really standing there with arms folded and face scowling, he says, right after a long day of Christmas shopping. This brings me to the second thing Jesus' guidance says to me. While I play along on the outside, I need to stand for something different on the inside. The insanity embedded in this convention is a serious thing. It is a sickness that causes real pain, and that is why I need to bring the antidote. While going along with the form, I need to hold in mind a transformed content. That transformed content is not judgment and condemnation over how insane this convention is. It is a non-judgment and love, and if I do that, I can be the leaven that leavens the whole loaf. This, of course, is exactly what Jesus asked Bill and Helen to do here. Go through the motions of the psychological testing on the outside while recognizing on the inside that we are discussing only illusions, and saying a prayer for this brother, and thereby calling forth and experiencing a miracle. It might be good for us to think about where we are in relation to these issues. For instance, where in our lives do we join in with some convention, just like everyone else, as if that convention is perfectly sane? And where in our lives do we show up grumbling and in judgment, even if our protest is silent? Perhaps we can think of one example of each, and then realize that the answer is to recognize that this convention is only an illusion and it has no real meaning at all, and remind ourselves that we are there purely to extend non-judgment and to love those present, so that instead of perpetuating the insanity, we can call for, all right, let me repeat that. Perhaps we can think of one example of each, and then realize that the answer is to recognize that this convention is only an illusion that has no real meaning at all, and remind ourselves that we are there purely to extend non-judgment and love to those present, so that instead of perpetuating the insanity, we call forth and experience a miracle. Thank you so much for joining with me. Day 353, Cameo 30. As you see him, you will see yourself. I love you. Thank you.